The ledgers of silence, a testimony from Terra's embrace. They called me precise. For 19 years, I had cataloged geological survey data for the Administratum's Terraformation Census Bureau, cross-referencing mineral deposits with extraction quotas, verifying tectonic stability reports against settlement placement protocols, maintaining the databases that proved humanity's dominion over reclaimed worlds was absolute. My overseer said my attention to geological patterns made my work invaluable. I believed him. I believed the Emperor's vision transformed dead rock into living hope. My name is Sareth Quellen. I served as Geological Archivist 2nd Class for Subsector Pacificus Terraformation Division, and I want you to understand, I measured the bones of worlds before I learned they were screaming. Papi Part 1, The Order of Stone. The archive chamber maintained itself at 11 degrees Celsius, cold enough that my breath misted when I spoke the morning invocation. The chill preserved the data crystals, thousands of them arranged in crystalline matrices that caught the dim lumens and threw fractured light across vaulted ceilings. I arrived each morning at the 4th bell's 6th chime, exactly as I had for 19 years, and began my devotions before the carved aquila that dominated the eastern wall. Emperor, guide my hand in your great work. Let these records honor your reclamation of the void. In stone we find your permanence. In soil we plant your future. The words tasted familiar, comfortable as worn leather. I meant every syllable. My workstation occupied the 3rd tier of the northern gallery, overlooking the main archive floor where 27 other archivists maintained humanity's geological memory. The desk was ironwood, imported from a recently terraformed agri-world, its grain pattern like frozen rivers. My data slate sat precisely centered, flanked by 3 bound ledgers, active surveys, completed transformations, abandoned projects. Everything in its proper place. Everything contributing to the grand pattern of imperial expansion. The breakfast ration arrived at the 2nd hour's beginning, delivered by Servitor Unit Theta 7-9, whose augmetic legs clicked rhythmically on stone floors. Protein paste, mineral supplement. Recaf so bitter it scarred the throat. I consumed it while reviewing overnight data transmissions from 17 worlds undergoing active terraformation. Atmospheric processors on Valdris Secundus operating at 91% efficiency. Tectonic stabilizers on Gaia's moon holding within acceptable parameters. Ocean seeding on New Hydros proceeding ahead of schedule. Each world a testament to humanity's mastery over lifeless matter, each successful transformation a prayer made manifest. I took pride in this work. Real pride, not the hollow kind voiced in mandatory devotionals. When I processed the final completion report for a terraformed world, when I archived the data showing how human will had bent geology and atmosphere to purpose, I felt part of something greater than myself. The Emperor's vision made real through countless small labors, mine among them. We were building an empire that would last 10,000 years and 10,000 more. The rock itself remembered our triumph. The morning's first task involved processing survey data from Temperance Prime, a world in final stage terraformation. Population 17 million, mostly agricultural laborers and mineral extraction workers. The geological surveys showed stable continental plates, adequate mineral deposits for local manufacturing, atmospheric composition within human tolerance ranges. I verified the data against historical baselines, cross-referenced with neighboring system patterns, prepared to log it as another successful reclamation. The file contained an annotation I had not seen before. A small notation in the metadata field, easily missed. Geological anomaly investigation concluded, Ref. Inquisitorial Review 4741. No corrective action required. I marked it for follow-up, a minor curiosity. Probably unstable fault lines that had stabilized naturally, or mineral deposits that proved less valuable than initial scans suggested. Nothing that would affect the world's habitability status. My colleague Vash worked 3 stations down, an older man whose hands trembled slightly from decades of data, slate manipulation. He had trained me when I first arrived, taught me to read the subtle patterns in geological data that distinguished stable transformations from those requiring ongoing maintenance. During the midday rest period, we often shared observations about particularly elegant terraformation solutions. Quellen, he called across the gallery during the 3rd hour's middle period. Did you process the Valdris Secundus atmospheric readings? This morning. Efficiency at 91%, well above minimum thresholds. He made a sound I could not interpret. The oxygen-nitrogen balance seems offset from standard parameters. Worth a secondary verification. I added it to my task queue. Vash's instincts for atmospheric composition were rarely wrong. If he sensed something irregular, protocol demanded investigation. This was how the system maintained its precision through countless careful practitioners, ensuring accuracy. We were cogs in a vast machine, and I took satisfaction in being a cog that never slipped. The afternoon brought routine work. I cataloged mineral surveys from 3 newly discovered worlds, evaluated tectonic stability reports from 6 others, archived completion documentation for 2 minor moons, now considered fully adapted for human habitation. Each entry required 3 separate verification checks, cross-referenced against historical databases and peer-reviewed by senior archivists. The system's redundancy ensured errors could not propagate. Every decision was documented, every conclusion justified in triplicate. At the 7th hour's end, I prepared to depart for my habitation block. The archive chamber's environmental controls hummed their constant song, preserving the crystalline memory of 100,000 worlds. I performed the evening devotional before the Aquila, thanking the Emperor for another day of purposeful service. The stone walls absorbed my voice, held it in their mass, became part of the permanent record. Walking through the archive's outer corridors, I passed the memorial wall where they inscribed the names of archivists who had served for 40 years or more. 63 names carved in granite, some dating back centuries. I imagined my own name there someday, Sareth Quellen, who had maintained the geological memory of humanity's expansion with precision and faith. The thought brought warmth despite the corridor's chill. My habitation block stood 17 minutes walk from the archive, a standard Administratum residential structure housing 300 clerks, scribes, and low-ranking officials. My quarters occupied a single room on the 14th level, adequate for a person of my station. A cot, a small shrine to the Emperor, a chest containing 3 sets of work robes and personal effects. I needed nothing more. Simplicity served function, and function served the Imperium. Before sleep, I reviewed the day's work on my personal data slate, a habit my overseer encouraged for maintaining analytical sharpness. The Temperance Prime notation lingered in my thoughts. Geological Anomaly Investigation concluded Ref. Inquisitorial Review 4, 771 M41. No corrective action required. Why would the Inquisition investigate geological anomalies? Their purview covered heresy, corruption, threats to imperial faith. Perhaps the anomaly had suggested Xenos' presence, some buried artifact requiring theological clearance. Yes, that made sense. The Inquisition had verified no heretical contamination existed, cleared the world for continued habitation. Another example of the system's thoroughness. I extinguished the lumen and recited the night prayer. Emperor, watch over your servants. Let us wake to serve again. Sleep came easily, undisturbed by questions I had not yet learned to ask. Quarpi Part 2 Fractures in Foundation. The morning began as all mornings began, with prayer and cold breath, and the familiar descent into the archive's crystalline silence. But Vash did not arrive at his station. His desk sat empty through the first hour, through the second. At the third hour's beginning, Overseer Malthus emerged from his sanctum and announced that Vash had been reassigned to a different subsector facility. No explanation, no farewell, just absence where familiarity had been. I felt the loss more keenly than expected. 19 years we had worked in proximity, sharing observations and small courtesies that made the archives chill less lonely. But reassignment was common in the Administratum. Personnel moved where their skills proved most useful. Vash had probably trained someone at another facility as thoroughly as he had trained me. The Emperor's work continued regardless of individual attachment. The Valdris Secundus atmospheric readings that Vash had questioned sat in my task queue. I pulled the complete file, expecting to find the offset he mentioned was minor, easily explained by normal variation in terraformation processes. Instead, I found something that made no sense. The oxygen-nitrogen balance was not offset from standard parameters. It was offset from the world's own historical baseline. 3 months prior, readings had shown stable atmospheric composition matching human norms. Current readings showed a shift toward higher nitrogen concentration, lower oxygen. Not dangerous yet, but trending in the wrong direction. Atmospheric processors should have corrected this automatically. Either they had malfunctioned, or something was consuming oxygen faster than processors could replenish it. I checked the processor status logs. All systems operational. No malfunctions reported, which meant something on Valdris Secundus was breathing the oxygen away. Protocol demanded I report anomalies to my overseer. But I hesitated, remembering Vash's sudden absence. Had he noticed something similar? Had his questioning led to his reassignment? No, that was paranoid thinking. Vash was old, probably requested transfer to lighter duties, and the atmospheric shift might have a mundane explanation I had not yet identified. I dove deeper into the data. Valdris Secundus had been fully terraformed for 11 years, population stable at 23 million. Agricultural production exceeded quotas. No reports of civil unrest or heretical activity. A model reclamation, the kind featured in Administratum success documentation. Yet the atmosphere was changing in ways that suggested the planet itself was inhaling differently. Cross-referencing against similar atmospheric compositions, I found correlation with pre-terraformation readings, as if the world was reverting to its original state before human intervention. But that was impossible. Terraformation was permanent. Once a world's geology and atmosphere had been restructured, once its fundamental nature had been rewritten to sustain human life, it remained changed. The process was irreversible. We had performed it successfully on thousands of worlds across the Imperium, unless the process was not as permanent as we believed. I closed the file and stared at my reflection in the darkened data slate screen. My face looked hollow in the dim light, eyes shadowed. This line of thinking led nowhere productive. Valdris Secundus required additional monitoring, nothing more. I logged a request for enhanced atmospheric surveillance and moved to the next task in my queue. But the unease lingered like the archive's persistent chill. 3 days later, the enhanced surveillance reports arrived. The atmospheric shift on Valdris Secundus was accelerating. Oxygen levels declining measurably each day, nitrogen rising proportionally. The population had not yet noticed, the change still within breathable tolerances, but projections showed dangerous hypoxia levels within 8 months. The world was suffocating its human inhabitants in slow motion. I pulled comparable data from Temperance Prime, the world whose annotation had first caught my attention. Historical atmospheric readings showed identical patterns, stable for years post-terraformation. then gradual reversion toward pre-human baseline composition. But Temperance Prime's file showed no current population. The world had been subject to exterminatus 4 months prior, 17 million souls cleansed by orbital bombardment. Reason given: uncontrolled geological instability threatening neighboring systems. I accessed the geological survey that had justified the destruction. The report was brief, perfunctory. Tectonic cascade event imminent, probability 97%. Potential debris field hazard to shipping lanes, Imperial Navy recommends immediate action. Signed by Lord Admiral Hesketh. Countersigned by Inquisitor Valen, executed within 6 hours of report submission. Something was wrong with that sequence. Geological surveys required extensive analysis, peer review, multiple verification passes. Tectonic cascade events could be predicted months in advance, not discovered suddenly with 97% certainty. And the report had been filed after the inquisitorial review. I had noted in the metadata, the review that concluded no corrective action required. If no corrective action was required, why was the planet destroyed 3 weeks later? I needed to see the original inquisitorial review. That document would explain the contradiction, would show what had changed between the initial assessment and the final decision. Access to inquisitorial files required special clearance, but geological archives referenced by such files could be accessed for administrative purposes. I crafted a request carefully, citing need to verify survey data accuracy for ongoing quality assurance protocols. The request was denied within 2 hours. Insufficient clearance. Inquisitorial review documents sealed under authority of the Ordo Hereticus. Geological survey data superseded by military assessment. No further administrative access required. Denied. After 19 years of faithful service, after processing hundreds of thousands of geological surveys with perfect accuracy, my request to verify a contradiction in the permanent record was denied without explanation. I sat motionless at my station for several minutes, hands resting on the cold ironwood desk. Around me, 26 other archivists worked in familiar rhythms, entering data and verifying records and maintaining the vast machinery of imperial geological knowledge. None of them seemed troubled. None of them questioned. Perhaps none of them had noticed the contradictions I was accumulating like lesions in flesh. That evening, I did not return immediately to my habitation block. Instead, I descended to the archive's lowest levels, where historical records predating my service were stored in ancient data, crystals requiring manual interface. If the current files were sealed, perhaps older records would reveal pattern. The lower archive smelled of ancient dust and degrading parchment, layers of human knowledge slowly decomposing despite environmental controls. I accessed records from 50 years prior, searching for worlds that had undergone terraformation and subsequent destruction. The search parameters returned 47 results. I began reading Gaia's moon terraformed M40-834, population 8 million, destroyed M40-891. Official reason: uncontrolled mutation event, biological contamination threatening quarantine protocols. I pulled the pre-destruction biological surveys. They showed no mutation patterns, no contamination markers. The world's medical logs reported standard illness rates, no epidemics. Nothing suggesting the population was transforming into something inhuman. The execution order had been signed 3 days after a routine inquisitorial inspection. New Hydros terraformed M40-901, population 12 million, destroyed M40-967. Official reason: emergence of heretical cult necessitating complete population removal. The pre-destruction surveillance reports logged 7 suspected heretics, less than 1 in a million population ratio, all arrested and executed locally. No evidence of widespread corruption. The planet itself was cleansed anyway, every living thing burned to ash, the oceans boiled away, The atmosphere stripped. Valdris Tertius. Terraformed in 22.3, population 19 million, destroyed M40, 798. Official reason, Xenos infiltration. Complete population compromised. The xenological surveys found no alien presence. Not a single Xenos organism identified in 2 years of investigation. But the world had shown atmospheric reversion similar to what I was now seeing on Valdris Secundus. The atmosphere had been changing itself, becoming less hospitable to human life. 3 months after that finding was documented, the Exterminatus order was issued. Pattern recognition was emerging like landscape through dissipating fog. Terraformed worlds showing signs of atmospheric or geological reversion were being destroyed. The justifications varied, but the underlying trigger remained consistent. When a world began reverting to pre-human conditions, when the terraformation showed signs of impermanence, the response was total annihilation. They were not destroying these worlds because they threatened neighboring systems or because their populations were corrupt. They were destroying them because the terraformation was failing, and that failure could not be acknowledged. I rid through the night, moving from world to world, accumulating data points that built toward a conclusion I did not want to accept. 23 of the 47 destroyed worlds showed documentary evidence of atmospheric or geological reversion before their destruction. 23 worlds where the imperial triumph over lifeless matter had proven temporary, where dead rock and hostile air had begun reasserting themselves against human modification. 23 worlds whose populations died not for any crime they committed, but because their continued existence would reveal that terraformation was reversible. The Emperor's great work. The reclamation of the void, the transformation of death into life, was not permanent. We could not hold what we claimed to have conquered. The stones we had ordered into submission were remembering their original form. And rather than admit this failure, rather than acknowledge that our control was temporary and our mastery incomplete, we erased the evidence along with everyone who had witnessed it. I was complicit. For 19 years, I had processed the geological surveys that justified these destructions. I had verified the data, maintained the records, helped construct the narrative that each exterminatus was necessary for the Imperium's protection. I had taken pride in my precision, my attention to detail, my contribution to humanity's expansion. I had measured the bones of dying worlds and called it faithful service. My hands were shaking. The data, crystal's light swam in my vision, fracturing into rainbow edges. I closed the files and sat in the lower archive's darkness, surrounded by the accumulated documentation of imperial genocide dressed in bureaucratic language. The archive's environmental controls hummed their constant song. 11 degrees Celsius, cold enough to preserve the lies we told ourselves about our permanence, cold enough to keep truth frozen in crystal matrices where only the faithful would find it. I was faithful. I had been faithful. I wanted desperately to remain faithful. But faith required not seeing what I had seen, and I could not unmake that knowledge any more than a terraformed world could choose to remain transformed. Arfi, Part 3. The Architecture of Necessity. I reported for duty the next morning, because not reporting would draw attention. My hands still trembled slightly as I performed the morning devotional, but I kept my voice steady. Emperor, guide my hand in your great work. The words tasted like ash. Overseer Malthus summoned me at the 4th hour. His sanctum occupied a vaulted chamber 1 level above the main archive, its walls lined with bound ledgers dating back centuries. He sat behind a desk of black stone, hands folded precisely, expression neutral. He was 63 years old, had served the Administratum for 41 years, and would have his name carved on the memorial wall when he finally retired. I had always admired his dedication. Archivist Quellen, he said without preamble. You accessed lower archive records last night. Historical terraformation data spanning 5 decades. Explain the purpose of this research. My mouth went dry. Of course they monitored access to sensitive historical files. I had been foolish to think otherwise. Quality assurance protocols. Overseer, I discovered contradictions in recent survey data and wanted to verify against historical patterns. What contradictions? I could lie. I could retreat into safe ignorance, claim I had found nothing significant, accept whatever explanation he offered. Instead I said, atmospheric reversion on Valdris Secundus. Similar to patterns preceding the destruction of 23 worlds in the historical record. I wanted to understand the correlation. Malthus was silent for several seconds. His augmetic left eye clicked softly, focusing mechanisms adjusting. Then he said, close the door. I obeyed, sealing us in the sanctum's isolation. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. I sat. You were not supposed to notice, he said quietly. Most archivists work their entire careers without accumulating sufficient data points to recognize the pattern. Vash noticed. I had him transferred before his questions could spread to others. I thought you lacked his specific expertise in atmospheric analysis. I was wrong. So it's true. Terraformation is failing. The worlds are reverting, not failing. Reverting implies degradation of our efforts. The worlds are? He paused, choosing words carefully. They are remembering. Geology has memory. Atmospheres have equilibrium states they trend toward. We impose new patterns, but the old patterns persist like scars in stone. Eventually, given enough time, the original nature reasserts itself. How long? Variable. Depends on the world's fundamental composition. The extent of modification required during terraformation. Unknown factors we have not identified. Some worlds remain stable for centuries. Others begin reverting within decades. We cannot predict which will fail or when. And when they do, we destroy them. Malthus closed his eyes briefly, an expression of profound exhaustion settling onto his features. We destroy the evidence. Yes. Why? Why not evacuate the populations? Why not admit the limitation and adapt? He opened his eyes and looked at me with something approaching pity, because the Imperium's authority rests on perception of permanence. We claim mastery over the galaxy. We promise populations that if they submit to imperial rule, they will be protected, that their worlds will remain habitable, that humanity's dominion is eternal. If we admit that terraformation is temporary, that our control is provisional, the entire psychological foundation of imperial governance fractures. Better to murder billions than admit limitation. Better to murder billions than face sector-wide rebellion, system collapse, and the fragmentation that would kill trillions. The Imperium survives because populations believe compliance means safety. If they learn that safety is temporary, that their worlds might revert to lifelessness regardless of their loyalty, why would they continue submitting? They would demand we fix the problem, and we cannot. The technology does not exist. We can delay reversion, slow it, but not prevent it entirely. He stood and walked to a cabinet behind his desk, removing a data crystal I had never seen before. He placed it on the desk between us. This is the necessity doctrine, written by Lord Executor Thranis 6,000 years ago, when the pattern was first identified. It argues that imperial survival requires not just protection of populations, but protection of the narrative. That systematic deception, backed by strategic violence against those who witness deception's failure, is preferable to societal collapse. The doctrine has been Administratum policy ever since. Every overseer of sufficient rank learns it. Every one of us carries the burden of maintaining the lie. You knew. All these years, You knew we were processing justifications for genocide. I know what we are preventing. Sector-wide chaos. Populations fleeing stable worlds in panic, overwhelming transportation infrastructure, destabilizing supply chains. Armed conflict over remaining permanent worlds. The disintegration of administrative control. I have read the projections. If the truth becomes public, we estimate 40 billion casualties in the first 5 years from societal breakdown alone. More than we have executed to maintain the secret over millennia. I stared at the data, crystal. That's the justification. Kill some to save more. No. His hands were trembling now, slight but visible. That's the rationalization. The justification is that someone must be willing to bear this burden, and I choose to be someone rather than no one. I don't know if the projections are accurate. I have never known. But if they are correct, and I do nothing, and billions die from collapse that might have been prevented, then my refusal to act makes me complicit in greater horror. So I act, and I carry the weight. And I have not slept soundly in 30 years. There must be another way. Propose one. His voice was flat, mechanical. Propose a solution that provides stable terraformation, or that allows honest acknowledgement without triggering collapse, or that prevents panic when populations learn their worlds have expiration dates. Give me an alternative, and I will execute it gratefully. But after 41 years of service, I have found none. Only choices between smaller and larger horrors. I had no answer. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, he said, "You have 3 options now. First, you accept the burden as I have. You continue your work knowing its true purpose, and you live with that knowledge. Second, you request transfer to a different division where you will not encounter this information again. I will approve such transfer immediately. Third, you refuse complicity and speak publicly about what you have learned. And if I choose the third option, then you become evidence that must be destroyed. Not because we are evil, but because the system cannot function if its foundation is exposed. I would sign the order myself. I would grieve while doing so. And I would sign it regardless, because allowing you to speak means allowing the cascade of consequences we have spent millennia preventing." He opened a drawer and removed a form, not pre-printed, but blank, waiting for justification. "I prepared this when I saw your access logs. I have not dated it yet. I would prefer not to. You have been an exceptional archivist, Quellen. Precise, dedicated, faithful. The kind of servant the Imperium requires. I would rather you survive." The form was a death warrant with my name already inscribed. All it required was date, signature, and stated reason. The reason line remained empty. "How many of these have you signed?" 40, one in my tenure as overseer. Vash would have been 42, but I chose transfer instead. I can extend that mercy, but only when I trust the person will not speak elsewhere. I do not yet know if I can trust you. I looked at the man who had overseen my work for 19 years. His hands shook continuously now. His augmetic eyes focusing mechanisms clicked erratically, as if the machine parts were failing. He looked diminished, hollowed out, a shell containing nothing but obligation and exhaustion. "You really don't know if this is right," I said. "I have never known. But someone must make the choice, and everyone else I knew who shared this burden has either died or gone mad or requested mental conditioning to suppress the knowledge. I remain because if I leave, someone else must take my place. Someone who might lack the doubt that keeps me from becoming comfortable with what I do. Better a tormented overseer than an enthusiastic one." He gestured to the data, crystal. "Read the necessity doctrine if you wish. Understand the logic that chains all of us. Then decide which choice you can live with." I took the crystal. It was warm from his hand. or perhaps from the heat of accumulated justifications. What did you choose when you first learned? I chose to stay, to continue processing the surveys and maintaining the records and signing the warrants when necessary. I told myself it was duty. I told myself someone must be willing. 30 years later, I still tell myself these things. I do not know if I have prevented greater suffering or merely participated in evil while calling it necessity. I have never known. Parfait, Part 4, The Weight of Stone. I did not read the necessity doctrine immediately. Instead, I returned to my station and completed the day's assigned tasks. I processed 17 geological surveys with perfect accuracy. I verified atmospheric readings for 4 worlds. I archived completion reports for 2 minor asteroid mining colonies. My hands moved through familiar procedures while my mind existed somewhere else, somewhere cold and silent and alone. That evening, I finally accessed the data crystal in my quarters. The necessity doctrine was 600 pages of philosophical argument backed by statistical projections and historical analysis. It began. Truth is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. Survival requires calculated deception, and calculated deception requires the elimination of inconvenient witnesses. This document explains why such elimination is not merely justified, but morally necessary. I read through the night. The arguments were sophisticated, compelling in their internal logic. They acknowledged the horror of what was being proposed, then argued that refusing to commit smaller horrors guaranteed larger ones. They cited historical examples where truth had triggered collapse. They presented mathematical models showing how panic propagated through populations. They estimated casualties from various scenarios: truth revealed versus truth suppressed, violent enforcement versus voluntary compliance, instant collapse versus gradual management. The conclusion was inevitable: a system of calculated murder, dressed in bureaucratic procedure and justified by projected alternatives, was preferable to systemic failure. Not good, not righteous, but less bad than the alternatives the authors could imagine. I wanted to find flaws in the reasoning. I wanted the logic to be obviously wrong, the projections clearly inflated, the entire framework a rationalization constructed by moral cowards. But the arguments were careful, the data extensive, the acknowledgement of uncertainty present throughout. These were not monsters lying to themselves. These were intelligent people grappling with impossible mathematics. Which made it worse. If they were obviously wrong, I could reject them comfortably. But they might be right. The collapse they feared might actually occur if truth became public. The casualties might actually exceed the lives taken to maintain the secret. I could not know. No one could know. We were all choosing between hypothetical horrors, hoping desperately we were preventing worse suffering than we inflicted. The data crystal also contained the execution records. 47 worlds destroyed over 5 decades, average population 14 million, total casualties approximately 658 million souls. Cleansed because their worlds had begun remembering pre-human nature, because that remembering revealed the impermanence of imperial transformation, because that impermanence threatened the narrative of permanence upon which governance depended. 658 million dead, executed not for crimes but for geography, for living on worlds that started reverting too soon. Their names were not recorded, only the worlds they had inhabited, only the justifications created post facto to explain away their elimination. And I had help. I had processed the surveys, verified the data, maintained the records. I had been precise, dedicated, faithful. My accuracy had made the killing more efficient. I attended the morning devotional in a state of numb clarity. Around me, 300 Administratum workers recited prayers, thanking the Emperor for another day of purposeful service. They believed their work contributed to humanity's survival. They were correct. They did not know the cost. They were fortunate. At my station, I found a message from Overseer Malthus. Report to Sanctum, 4th hour. Decision required. The Sanctum felt colder than I remembered. Malthus sat behind his black stone desk, the unsigned warrant lying before him like accusation. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. What is your choice, Quellen? I had spent the night weighing options, examining motivations, trying to identify the path that preserved something worth preserving. My faith was already destroyed. That could not be salvaged. But perhaps my humanity could survive if I refused complicity, even if refusal meant death. I cannot continue this work knowing what I know, and I cannot remain silent about 8 million murders dressed in procedural language. Then you choose to speak publicly. I choose to refuse. What you do with that refusal is your burden, not mine. Malthus picked up the warrant. His hands trembled as he dated it. Today's date, 6th hour of the 4th day of the 9th month. His signature was careful, precise despite the shaking. Then he wrote in the justification field, discovery of classified information, security risk, summary execution authorized. He looked at me while writing, his augmetic eye clicking softly. I am sorry, Quellen. You would have made an excellent overseer someday. Better than me, perhaps. You have the doubt that prevents comfort. Why not just transfer me like Vash? Because I see in your eyes what I saw in my own 30 years ago. You will not be able to suppress this knowledge. You will speak eventually, somewhere, to someone, and that speech will cascade into consequences I am charged with preventing. Vash was old, tired, willing to be silent for the sake of peace in his remaining years. You are young enough to believe witnessing matters. That makes you dangerous. He pressed a sigil on his desk. 2 enforcers entered the sanctum, their hands resting on shock mauls. They wore the insignia of the Administratum's internal security division, the ones who handled problems that could not be acknowledged publicly. Escort Archivist Quellen to Processing Chamber 7, Malthus said. His voice was flat, mechanical, drained of everything except procedure. Execute sentence within the hour. File the body with standard criminal notation. Update personnel records to reflect dismissal for cause. The enforcers took my arms. I did not resist. Resistance would change nothing except how many bruises I accumulated before dying. As they led me from the sanctum, Malthus said quietly, I will not sleep tonight, Quellen. I have not slept soundly since I signed my first warrant. I don't know if I am preventing collapse or participating in atrocity. I will never know. But I continue because someone must, and I would rather it be someone haunted by doubt than someone comfortable with death. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it mine. Pyfe Part 5 Testimony from Silence. I am dead now. I have been dead for 3 years. Or perhaps I died the moment I recognized the pattern in the data, the moment my faith transformed into comprehension. The enforcers were efficient. A single shot to the back of the skull, quick and professional. My body was processed as criminal waste, recycled into base materials for Administratum use. Perhaps some of my atoms now form part of the archive's crystalline data matrices, holding the records I once maintained. Perhaps I am part of the permanent memory now, in the most literal sense, but before they executed me, I took certain precautions. During my last night alive, while reading the necessity doctrine, I encoded this testimony into a geological survey report for a world that does not exist. I buried it in the archive's historical database under classification markers that would make it invisible to casual search, visible only to someone looking for the specific contradictions I had found. Someone like me. Someone who measured the bones of worlds and noticed they were screaming. If you are reading this, you have found those contradictions. You have seen the atmospheric reversion patterns. You have tallied the executed worlds and recognized the correlation between geological memory and genocide. You have probably been summoned to your overseer's sanctum and offered the same 3 choices I received. I cannot tell you what to choose. I chose refusal, and I died for it, and I do not regret my choice, even though it changed nothing. The warrants continued after my death. The worlds continued reverting. The doctrine continued operating. My death was a gesture of personal integrity that had no practical impact on the system I refused to serve. Perhaps that makes my choice meaningless. Perhaps Malthus was right that someone must bear the burden. That systematic murder backed by careful procedure is preferable to the collapse that truth might trigger. I do not know. I died without knowing. The mathematics of theoretical casualties versus actual ones is beyond my comprehension. But I know this. I measured the bones of worlds for 19 years. I was precise, faithful, certain. I took pride in my contribution to the imperial project. I believed the Emperor's vision made us masters of dead matter, capable of permanent transformation. I was wrong about all of it. Terraformation is temporary. Control is provisional. The stone remembers what we try to make it forget, and eventually that memory reasserts itself against our modifications. We are not masters. We are temporary occupants pretending our tenancy is ownership. And when the stone remembers itself, when the air reverts to its original composition, when the geology reasserts its fundamental nature, we kill everyone who witnesses that reversion rather than admit our mastery was illusion. 650, 8 million souls over 5 decades. That was the count when I died. The number has grown since. Valdris Secundus was destroyed 4 months after my execution. Population 23 million, cleansed by orbital bombardment. Official justification listed as emergent mutation threat requiring immediate response. The mutation was atmospheric. The world was remembering how to breathe without us. You will find more worlds in the current databases. The pattern accelerates as more terraformed worlds reach the threshold where reversion begins. The Administratum has refined its procedures since I served. The warrants are now pre-authorized, requiring only atmospheric trigger thresholds. When oxygen levels decline by specific percentages, when tectonic stability measures fall below designated parameters, the execution protocols activate automatically. No individual choice required. No overseer shaking while signing. Just mathematics and procedure and the grinding machinery of systematic erasure. Malthus signed 41 warrants during his tenure before signing mine as the 42nd. He died 8 months after my execution. Not from disease or violence, but from what the medical records termed voluntary cessation. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped performing the basic functions that sustain life. The Administratum processed his death as routine retirement, carved his name on the memorial wall, assigned a replacement overseer who would carry the burden without the doubt that had slowly destroyed him. I think about him often, in whatever passes for thought in the state beyond death. He was not a monster. He was a man who believed someone must be willing to sign the warrants. And he chose to be that someone rather than allow someone more comfortable with murder to take his place. He lived with doubt, with guilt, with the crushing weight of mathematical uncertainty about whether he was preventing greater horror or merely participating in it. That doubt killed him more thoroughly than any execution could have. But his doubt did not prevent the executions. It only made them painful for him personally. The worlds died regardless of whether he grieved while signing their warrants. The populations burned whether he slept soundly or lay awake tormented. His suffering changed nothing except the quality of his own existence. Perhaps that is why I chose differently. If my suffering would change nothing, if the system would continue regardless of my complicity or refusal, then at least my refusal preserved something worth preserving. Not the lives of distant populations I could not save, not the trajectory of imperial policy I could not alter, but my own conscience, my own dignity, my own capacity to say no even when no was meaningless. The necessity doctrine argues that calculated deception backed by strategic violence is preferable to systemic collapse. It presents sophisticated philosophical arguments about the mathematics of suffering, about choosing smaller horrors to prevent larger ones, about the moral weight of action versus inaction. Perhaps those arguments are correct. Perhaps refusing to sign the warrants, allowing truth to cascade through populations, would trigger the collapse that kills trillions instead of billions. I do not know, but I know this: the certainty required to execute 658 million souls based on theoretical projections of what might happen if truth becomes public is itself a form of faith. Faith that the projections are accurate. Faith that collapse is inevitable given truth. Faith that systematic murder is preferable to systemic risk. Faith that we can calculate the value of living humans against hypothetical casualties of scenarios that have never been allowed to unfold. I spent 19 years maintaining a different faith. Faith in the Emperor's vision and humanity's mastery and the permanent transformation of dead matter into living worlds. That faith was destroyed by evidence, by pattern recognition, by the accumulation of data points that revealed the foundation was fractured. The necessity doctrine asks me to replace that destroyed faith with new faith. Faith in projections and mathematical models and the wisdom of ancient administrators who decided millennia ago that truth was too dangerous for populations to bear. I refused that replacement faith, not because I knew it was wrong, but because I had learned to doubt all certainties. If my first faith was false, if 19 years of dedicated service was built on illusion, then why should I trust the second faith offered in its place? Both asked me to participate in death while calling it necessary. Both demanded I suppress doubt and execute my duties with precision. Both promised that individual suffering served a greater purpose. I chose doubt over certainty. I chose refusal over complicity. I chose death over the transformation into someone who could sign warrants while calling it duty. Perhaps that choice was selfish, preserving my conscience at the cost of continued service to the system. Perhaps if I had stayed, I might have prevented some small cruelty, made some minor difference in how the machinery of genocide operated. Perhaps my refusal was cowardice dressed as principle. But I am beyond such calculations now. I am dead, recorded as criminal waste, my atoms dispersed through Administratum recycling systems. This testimony exists only as encoded data, buried in historical archives, waiting for someone else to find the patterns I found, to face the choices I faced, to weigh impossible mathematics against impossible alternatives. When you read this, you who have measured the bones of dying worlds and recognized they are screaming, you will make your own choice. Stay and bear the burden as Malthus did, hoping your doubt prevents you from becoming comfortable with death. Request transfer and retreat into willful ignorance, preserving your sanity at the cost of your knowledge. Or refuse as I did, accepting death to preserve something intangible that will change nothing except the manner of your ending. There is no correct choice. The doctrine offers only different forms of complicity or different forms of erasure. The system will continue regardless. The worlds will continue reverting. The populations will continue dying. Your choice determines only your relationship to that continuation, not the continuation itself. But perhaps that relationship matters. Perhaps maintaining doubt in the face of certainty preserving conscience in the face of necessity, refusing transformation into someone comfortable with systematic murder. These things matter, even when they change nothing practical. Perhaps the only victory available is the victory of remaining human while participating in systems that demand we become something else. I do not know if I prevented any suffering through my refusal. I do not know if my death served any purpose except satisfying my own need to say no. I do not know if you should follow my example or should instead choose the burden Malthus carried. I died without answers, only with questions that haunted me through my final hours. But I know I measured the bones of worlds for 19 years with precision and faith. I know I discovered those bones were screaming, and that our measurements served to justify silencing them with orbital fire. I know I chose to refuse that service, even when refusal was meaningless. And I know that somewhere in the archives, I once maintained. This testimony waits for you to find it, to read it, to understand what I understood. The stone remembers. The air remembers. The geology of 10,000 worlds remembers what it was before we declared mastery over it. That remembering is inevitable, irreversible, fundamental to the nature of matter itself. We can delay it, but not prevent it. We can kill everyone who witnesses it, but not stop it from occurring. We can maintain faith in our permanence, but not make that faith true. You who read this will make your choice with whatever wisdom you possess. I made mine with doubt as my only certainty. I am dead now, dispersed into the systems I once served, but perhaps some fragment of what I was persists in these encoded words. Perhaps this testimony will matter to someone, somewhere, sometime. Perhaps it will change nothing except one person's relationship to the machinery of necessary genocide. That is all I have to offer. That is all I preserve through my refusal. A voice from beyond death saying, I saw the pattern. I understood the horror. I chose to refuse. I died with that choice intact. And if you are reading this, you too have seen what cannot be unseen. You too must decide what you will become in response to that seeing. The Emperor's light does not reach into the places where we bury the truth. No prayer sanctifies the archives where we store the evidence of our impermanence. No devotional can transform some systematic murder into righteous duty, no matter how sophisticated the philosophical arguments, no matter how terrible the projected alternatives. We are not masters of dead matter. We are custodians of a lie, and that lie requires constant feeding with living populations who witness its unraveling. I refused to feed it. I chose death instead. Whether that choice was courageous or cowardly, principled or selfish, meaningful or empty, I do not know. I know only that I made it, and that it was mine, and that no one could take it from me except through execution. They took my life, but not my choice. They dispersed my body, but not this testimony. They maintained the system, but not my complicity within it. That is insufficient. That changes nothing. That saves no one. But it is all I had to give, and I gave it completely. I was Sereth Quellen. I served as Geological Archivist Second Class for 19 years. I measured the bones of worlds with precision and faith. I discovered they were screaming, and that my measurements justified silencing them. I chose to refuse that justification, even when refusal was meaningless. And now I am dead, and this testimony persists. And you who read it must make your own choice. The stone remembers. The system continues. The impossible mathematics remain unresolved. Choose what you will become. Choose what you can live with. Choose knowing that all choices lead to different forms of complicity or different forms of death. I chose death. I do not regret my choice. I do not know if it mattered. But it was mine, and I made it with clear eyes, and that is the only victory available in systems designed to transform us into mechanisms of our own oppression. The archive chamber maintains itself at 11 degrees Celsius. The data, crystals hold the memories of 100,000 worlds. The memorial wall waits to receive new names of those who served with dedication and faith. The overseer's sanctum contains a drawer full of blank warrants, waiting for names and dates and justifications. The machinery continues its grinding operation, processing geological surveys and atmospheric readings, and the systematic erasure of populations who witness the impermanence of imperial transformation. Somewhere in that machinery, encoded in a survey report for a world that does not exist, this testimony waits. It has waited 3 years since my death. It will wait longer, perhaps centuries, until someone with sufficient clearance and sufficient pattern recognition and sufficient doubt finds the contradictions that lead to its discovery. When you find it, you who have measured the bones of dying worlds, remember, I was like you. I believed as you believed. I served as you have served. I discovered what you have discovered. And I chose what you must now choose. There is no right answer. There is only the answer you can live with or die with, depending on which you select. The stone remembers. So do I, in whatever form memory takes beyond death. So will you, regardless of your choice. We are all complicit. We are all victims. We are all participants in systems larger than individual conscience. But perhaps the relationship between conscience and system still matters, even when that relationship changes nothing about the system's operation. I am dead. My name was Sareth Quellen. I measured the bones of worlds for 19 years. I learned they were screaming. I chose to refuse the justification for their silence. This is my testimony from beyond death, from beyond complicity, from the place where all choices become equal in their ineffectiveness, but unequal in what they preserve of the person who makes them. Choose well, or choose poorly, or choose not at all and let others make the choice for you. The machinery continues regardless. But perhaps who we are within that machinery still matters, even when it matters only to ourselves, even when ourselves is all we have left to preserve. The Emperor's light illuminates the grand halls, where we proclaim mastery. It does not reach the archives where we bury the evidence of our impermanence. It does not touch the places where we calculate the mathematics of necessary genocide. It does not warm the cold chambers where we maintain the crystalline memory of 100,000 worlds, 23 of which I personally verified as innocent before they were destroyed. I am dead. I have been dead for 3 years. I will remain dead for as long as this testimony persists in the archives. And when you read these words, you who have found the pattern, you will understand death was the easier choice. Living with knowledge is the burden that destroyed Malthus. Death at least provides clarity, finality, escape from the impossible mathematics. But perhaps escape is cowardice. Perhaps staying and bearing the burden is the harder choice, the more meaningful one. Perhaps my refusal was selfishness, preserving my conscience at the cost of whatever small good I might have done by remaining. I do not know. The dead do not know anything except that they are dead, and even that knowledge is uncertain. What I know I refused. I died for refusing. My refusal changed nothing except the manner of my ending. And if you have read this far, you now carry the same knowledge I carried, and you must make the same impossible choice, and no one can make it for you except through force. The stone remembers. I remember. You will remember. The question is what we do with remembering, what we become in response to it, what we preserve or surrender in the face of systems that demand transformation into mechanisms of their continuation. I surrendered my life. I preserved my refusal. Whether that was sufficient, necessary, meaningful, or utterly empty, I do not know and cannot know. I know only that I made the choice, and it was mine, and no decree or doctrine or mathematical projection could take it from me except through execution. And so I died. As Sareth Quellen, who measured the bones of worlds and learned they were screaming, and chose to refuse the justification for their silence. As someone who believed, who doubted, who comprehended, who chose. As someone who hoped that refusal mattered, even when it changed nothing. The archive remembers me now, encoded in data, crystals maintained at 11 degrees Celsius. The memorial wall does not bear my name, for I was dismissed as criminal rather than honored as faithful servant. But this testimony persists, waiting for you, offering no answers except that I too faced what you face. And I chose as I chose, and the choice was mine even when its consequences extended only to my own death. Make your choice. Live with it, or die with it. But make it, knowing the stone remembers what we try to forget, and eventually all our attempts at permanent transformation revert to the fundamental nature we sought to overcome. We are not masters. We are temporary custodians of a lie that requires constant maintenance with the lives of those who witness its unraveling. I refuse to maintain it. I am dead now. This is my testimony. This is all I have left to give. Choose what you will become. The machinery continues regardless. Encoded testimony of Sareth Quellen, Geological Archivist, 2nd Class, Subsector Pacificus Terraformation Division, execute for security violations 6-44741, testimony encoded 6-447, M41, discovered status unknown.